Tarrant County Master Gardener Association has partnered with the Tarrant Regional Water District to encourage water conservation. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean that water to meet drinking standards for our communities. There are currently 2.3 million people living in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. There's also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. So be sure and check out SaveTarrantWater.com to sign up for their free services.
My name is Mary Ann Levine. I've been a Master Gardener for 9 years. And I'm a retired pediatrician, and I like to grow things, and I like to have a pretty landscape. So I'm going to share the information that I have studied and learned about, sometimes through accidental things that I probably shouldn't have done and things that I have done that have been successful. So we're going to start with Introduction to Landscape or Horticulture. This is a broad overview. So understand that some of these topics that I touch on, or you can have a whole course in some of these topics that I just touch on. So let's get started. First, we're going to talk about all the different types of landscape people that you can hire or that you can study under or that you can become that deal with landscaping. Sometimes landscaping of large areas, sometimes landscaping of smaller areas. Different landscape designers are APLD, Association of Professional Landscape Designers, the ASLA, American Society of Landscape Architects, the IFLA, International Federation of Landscape Architects and Landscape Designers. And in Texas, you can call yourself a landscape designer, but you have to have no state or educational requirements. And there are many people who do landscape design. If you hire someone who has no degree, is not a landscape architect, what you can ask for is, can we see some of the things that you've done? And then you can satisfy yourself that this person is going to do a good job on your home. Also, price ranges change. If you hire a landscape architect that's college degreed, he's probably going to cost considerably more than someone who calls himself a landscape designer. Probably. You don't always know that. Landscaping is what you see when you drive through your neighborhoods, what you look at when you see homes and their yards, what you see around businesses and that sort of thing. Landscaping is a visual feature of the countryside or urban areas, and you hope that they have aesthetic appeal. Trends in landscape designs, well, some of the trends are very small lawns or no lawn at all. There's a housing development close to me that has beautiful new homes. They have very small lawns, but then they've created a space around between all of the houses where kids can play, games can be played, and it is visually very pretty. And so they made their own park in their neighborhood, and I think that's a wonderful trend we hope continues. So many builders crowd the spaces, make homes with no lawns. Where are the children going to play? Where your animals are going to run? What are you going to do in the lawn? So smaller lawns or no lawn for busy people sometimes, but getting outside is more and more important to us in this day and age. Utilizing the outdoors for purposes of entertainment or shared spaces, landscape decisions based on water conservation, and that's something that North Central Texas is really trying to get everybody. More people move into Texas, our population is growing, and Texas uses groundwater primarily for our water. And with more and more people and more development, water is going to be very, very important. Another thing, too, is many people do not want use of pesticides and herbicides in their yard. Pesticides, of course, are things that kill insects and other creatures. Herbicides are toxic to plants. Planting trees for shade, beauty, and cooling is something that's very important. And I think many people who move into a neighborhood with no trees, after one summer in Texas, they would really wish they had a shade tree, because a shade tree does reduce your energy bills. They're beautiful. You go under a shade tree, it's cool under there or cooler. Also, we want to avoid storm runoff using porous concrete. And if you're building your own home and you have the opportunity to have this, it's very important to talk about using porous concrete so you do not get runoff from your landscape into the lakes and rivers and streams. Dry rock beds help. Rain gardens or other methods of directing water do help. This is my front yard, and this is an example. My house, the yard goes down as a gentle slope, but just the same, the tree on this slight berm here, when a good rain came, the soil just washed down right into the sidewalk in front of my house. And I said, this has got to stop. And so we engineered actually it's a rock garden, but it slows down the water that would wash off the berm. And so there's no wash that comes on the walkway or up to my house at all. It's very, very nice. It's worked for, I probably have had this about 10 years now, and it works beautifully. Right in my back, speaking from experience, I have a non-porous, large concrete pad in the back for the cars to turn around and go into the garage. Well, what happens is, the house being on a slight decline, the water will run down the driveway and run back to the back of the concrete and then rush down the area behind these boxwoods, and it was just a mud hole. It's just mud. And so I actually placed this myself. It's a rock bed that has the borders, and at the end of it, where you can't really see too well, there's a cascade of large rocks that also slow down the water. And I've had no wash or no problem with it ever. You just occasionally have to get a few weeds picked out of it, but that's about it. And it's served its purpose very, very well. So I don't get the wash and the runoff and the mud I used to. So these are ways to control your water flow in your landscape. And this is an example that a person who lives not too far from me who has Circle Drive in the front of their house. And of course they would get, as the water goes down off the driveway, you get a wash. And so they put a rock bed there with some plantings to make it more attractive, to slow the water down. This is the side of my house that, as you can see, the driveway slightly goes down. There's a huge pecan tree. It's a monster, and it's grown tremendously since I've lived there. So all the grass died, and all it would do is the mud just wash down to the driveway. So I took out all the scanty grass that was there and any weeds that were there and replaced it with stone. There's no wash now, and it holds very, very well. And what grass is left is growing up on the top of the slight hill there. How to draw a landscape. People say, well, I'm so intimidated. I go out and I have maybe a quarter of an acre. I have, a fairly large front yard, as maybe small backyard, or the opposite, large backyard, small front yard. And how do I decide what to do with my yard? For one thing, you got to go out and look at it. You have to go out and look at it and check out, see where the light comes from, the direction of the sun when it rises, direction of the sun when it goes down, what's in full sun, what's in shade, how many trees do you already have that you have to deal with a tree there, what shrubs that you already have or maybe need. And then you can decide on some things and draw a graph paper to scale of your property. You can use 1/8 inch to 1 foot a landscape. So a 60 by 80 foot landscape can go on an 8.5 by 11 sheet. You can make a rough drawing using bubbles. You can use a Google satellite image to start. Only problem is I have these trees that hide my yard, so the Google image just shows some big trees. You can't really see through the trees, not like a LiDAR, where they bounce the off of the ground. Use the deed map of the house and yard, and that's what I did. I used the deed map, and oh my goodness, I've lived there long enough. I've made it so complicated. It's a complicated yard. So you can, as you can see though, you can see the house where the house is. You can see the property lines. You can see what the front looks like and how big the front and the back is. You can see the large concrete drive in the back, and you can see the pathway in the back, and you can see the rock bed in the front, and you can see where the trees are. So that gets you a start, and you say, well, I need a workspace for garden equipment. I need a place to grow vegetables or flowers. I need to hide some things. If I have a building that's a shed in the back, I may want to put something in front of that to hide it. You have to decide in your front yard and your backyard what kinds of uses do you want. Do you want a patio that you can lounge around? You want a way to cook, an outdoor kitchen? Do you want a swimming pool? All the different things you have to consider in your landscape, but it helps to draw it out just to get yourself an idea even before you present it maybe with a landscape designer. The decision-making process and dealing with your landscape, you have to set goals. And believe me, I've lived in my house almost 30 years now, so it wasn't all done. I didn't complicate it all at once. It was a slow process over time because you have to consider the budget. You have to consider what you want to do. You have to maybe get professional input, and then you can decide what you want to do yourself. And if you like to be outdoors and you like to get a little sweaty and a little dirty, it's a lot of fun sometimes to do stonework yourself or do whatever you feel. But if you're a busy person, you don't have the time to do that, you can consult with a professional and tell them what you would like, and they can do that for you and give you suggestions as well. Do you want a garden for edibles? Do you want to do pollinators? Do you want to make the bees and butterflies happy? Do you want to have some kind of wildlife, which sometimes wildlife in the city can be pretty good wildlife, even in an urban setting. I get possums and armadillos and raccoons, and squirrels. We get all kinds of things where I live. Seasonal color. Do you want to have a seasonal color so that you can plant an area for every season? And that's something to think about too. Curb appeal. When somebody drives up to your house, do they go, ooh, or do they go, oh? It depends on what you want. Plant collections. Some people do collect succulents and cacti. Some people collect tropicals, that sort of thing. They want a greenhouse. You don't want a greenhouse. Privacy, noise reduction, all those things are important. Time to devote to the yard garden. Your budget. Do you have children? You have to consider your children, give them a place to play and have fun. If you have pets, a dog needs a little space to run in addition to taking them for long walks on a leash. And the style of the home. You have to look at your house and say, is this a ranch style house? Is this what I call a terra house with columns and all that? Is this a formal house and informal house? And I'll show you some pictures later of different styles of homes. You do not, if you have a terra house, which has the columns, and it's the old-fashioned Southern style house, you don't want succulents and cacti in front of your house. It does not match the house. So you have to think about that as well. The features outside the home, another thing to think about, where are the electrical outlets? Where are the faucets outside? Where are the downspouts and hardscape already present? Like I said, if I had to go back, I would have a porous concrete pad in the back to have the cars turn around rather than a concrete that's non-porous. Sometimes you have to deal with what you have. You also need to know the north, south, east, west orientation of your home and yard so that you can determine the areas that are going to be, maybe have a microclimate for plants and plants that are a little more tender, winter tender, or don't like as much heat in the summer in some of those places. Desirable features to consider, and a lot of people, if you're going to a garden tour, and almost everybody has some kind of water element. A rain garden is one that if you have a low area and it holds water after rain, you can plant plants there that like that. You can have a water catchment area, and then rain barrels are really, really important now because the water that comes off your roof can be collected in a rain barrel, and you can water with it without increasing your water bills, which can be significant in Fort Worth. Compost areas and work areas, and those you need to consider. You don't want a compost area in your front yard. You want a work area. You want to have all that sort of nice and hidden away if you can. If you can't, you can still have those areas in your yard. A garden shed or storage house is invaluable. It cleans out your garage unbelievably. You can make a garage really neat with a lot of tools and things, but if you have a garden shed or storage house, it is invaluable. Expanding the outdoor living space, if you want a patio, an outdoor kitchen, a swimming pool, a water feature, all those things you have to consider. And again, it doesn't have to be done all at once. You can leave space for these things and develop this over time. A lot of houses I've been to have vegetable or kitchen gardens, and chickens are a big thing now, so chicken coops are important. And then dog runs may be important for you if you have dogs and you want to keep their poop off the yard and keep them in a certain area. Right. Consideration for hardscape. Hardscape features, there's decks, driveways, circular drives, expanded parking, walkways, walls, fences, stone or dry rock beds, arbors, gazebos, play area for children, tree houses, tennis courts, games area, and jungle gyms. A lot of things can go in a yard, and it can be very enjoyable if you make it easy to use and comfortable for children and animals and your guests as well, family and friends. Materials for hardscaping can include a lot of different things. Again, if you're going to use concrete, try and get porous concrete. Stone in various forms is cobble, and as you saw that I showed earlier, we used cobble to make the dry rock bed. You can use smaller cobble, you can use really large cobble, and flat stones are nice for walkways, and you can use pea gravel. Pea gravel tends to kick out of a walkway if you don't have stepping stones, and sometimes they'll wash out of a walkway, but it's easy to put back in. Cut stone is nice. If you have a cut stone that's nice and flat and can be mortared, or you can leave it unmortared and plant thyme or other plants between the stones. Decking material includes a variety of materials as well. concrete, metal, brick, and stone. Those are wood as well. Those are all things that people can make decks out of. And a deck is a place to relax. It's a place to view your yard that you've maintained and you've got it beautiful. And you can sit out there and family and friends can join you as well on a deck. Sometimes the decks can be covered. Sometimes the decks can be completely open. Sometimes the decks can be shaded by trees, however that you think that you want a deck. But it's just nice to have that extension from your house. Planting beds in the landscape. Curving forms are more pleasing than straight lines. Curving forms, curvilinear, looks so much better than a straight line. I unfortunately inherited a walk that's straight across the front of the house. Make your ideas from that curve of the hose, whatever looks good to you. Remember that a wider border is better than a real narrow border if you can do that, because you can plant things more appropriately in a wider border. Borders can be bermed. By berm, I mean it can be raised up slightly where it's just above the grass level or the soil below that, and that kind of cuts it off. Or you can have a flat bed. It does not matter. It can be flat with the rest of the ground, but a berm sort of raises things up and it's a little bit easier to deal with. And then you can separate the berm or the flat area from the turf with metal, plastic, wood, brick, stone, twigs, wine bottles, and pretty much anything that your imagination can supply. So you can let your imagination run wild. The only thing about wine bottles is they can break. So you have to be careful with some things. If you have busy kids that are playing ball and or say wine bottles are probably out. Raised beds allow amended soil, and I cannot tell you, in north central Texas, we have hard clay. Some of the areas have a little more sandy soil, some of them have a little more loamy soil, but by and large, most of the homes, the yards, and the beds are hard clay. So you have to really amend that hard clay to break it up. So if you build a raised beds, that allows you to control what goes in the bed. So you can put your own amended soil in the bed and you get better drainage and better weed control as well. And also you don't get the grass growing into a raised bed like you would if the bed's flat with the turf and you have just a single border between the turf and your bed, because the grass will grow underneath whatever you put there or over it. And so you're always dealing with that. But a raised bed, you don't have that much to deal with. Be sure the beds, if you make curvilinear beds, be sure if you separate them from the turf, be sure you could mow around those curvilinear beds. There's nothing like a tight curve and a lawnmower. You cannot mow around a very tight curve, so you're going to have to weed eat only those curves, and that's a big hassle for a lot of people. So be sure you can mow around your beds. Consider the views of your beds from the inside of your house. When you look out of your windows, what would you like to see? You don't want to see the back of shrubs. You want to see something beyond that. And so consider the views from the inside of the house. And this is something, know the ultimate height and width of your foundation plants. Your foundation plants are going to be right to the windows, right in front of your windows. And again, you do not want your view totally obscured by large shrubs. Sometimes I see homes where you can't see the windows at all. They're hidden completely by the huge shrubs. And if you have to put a shrub in that is going to be 12 feet tall as its normal height, and you're going to always trying to be cutting that back, then you need to remove it and place it someplace else, or you need to get something that's appropriate height. This is a house in my neighborhood. Every time I go by, I want to hack it with a hatchet and improve things. It's got too much shade for those shrubs that are by the walk, so the shrubs are all thinned out and ugly. That there's a corner on one side where the vines grow over, and then there's a curve on the other side. I've never been able to figure that out. Then in front of the house, you can hardly see the door because it's got these thin shrubs there. And then on the other side, the window, the large window, is completely obscured with a too tall shrub. And it's been this way forever, but you know, I should leave a sticky note on the door when I go by to tell them, please take out your shrubs. This is a place, I didn't show the whole house, but I wanted to show how when you buy shrubs and plants, it's nice to buy them in odd numbers, like 3s and 5s and 7s and 9s. And if you see here, all of that's been done. Now this house is a pretty fancy house, so it's probably been professionally done. But as you can see, everything is in 3s or more. And that is very helpful as far as looks go. There's something about the odd number shrubs. They look more clumped, they look more together, and they look like they all belong together. Mulching beds. I have neighbors that never mulch their beds, and it's just mud, you know, so the mud splashes up on their plants, and the plants get their plants get fungal infections. The mulching, whatever you use for mulch, you can use ground up leaves, you can use pine bark, ground up pine bark, you can use straw, you can use pine needles, but pine needles in East Texas are common, but they're not too common here. You can order them and purchase them. But mulching does retain moisture in the soil. It keeps the temperatures even in the soil for your roots of your plants. You don't get erosion if you put mulches there, although some mulches do wash. If you get what we call in Texas is a gully washer, you can get a wash of your mulch. You just sweep it back in, you just put it back. But it does avoid plant diseases, particularly fungal diseases on your leaves. It tears weeds. Weeds are not going to germinate up through an inch of mulch. It looks so much neater than bare soil, and it also keeps your feet clean. If you're going to trim a shrub or you're going to trim something, you're not walking around in mud to do that. And if you have a garden where you have soil and you have some mulch in between the soil where you grow your vegetables, you get a mud-free walk in the garden. Now, I know there's shoes like wellies, that you can wear to walk in the mud, but it's so much nicer to walk on a mulch rather than walk in the mud. The types of mulch include pine straw, pine bark, hardwood, coconut husk, straw, cedar shavings, compost, grass clippings, pea gravel, leaf compost, stone, landscape fabric, rubber mulch. I'm not fond of rubber mulch, okay? And plastic. That you can buy this and you can use it. I'm also not fond, it's just a personal preference. I'm not fond of the red mulches and black mulches. I just think they look kind of tacky. Okay, well that's just me, but other people do like them and do use them. Some mulch is permeable and some is impermeable, and it's best to know which one is which and use natural materials that ultimately enrich the soil. So if you grind up your leaves, you have a lot of trees, you can use grass clippings and grind those up really well and put those out as a mulch. You can use your leaf trimmings and the leaves that fall about this time of year. You can use that and use a mulching mower, grind those up, and then put those on your beds as mulch. It works very well. Plant selection for your yard, for your landscape. Try and find out either through the extension office or someone who knows what plants are native and adapted for Texas, especially north central Texas. Texas has a lot of different environments. South Texas, rarely do they have a freeze, but we can get some pretty severe freezes here in north central Texas. East Texas is going to be more wet. We tend to be a little drier in north central Texas. West Texas is drier still, and also can get very hot in the summer as well as we do. So you have to realize that some plants are just not going to do well. South of the Red River, there's plants that will do well, but north of the Red River, the plants that we may borrow from Oklahoma may not do well in north central Texas. Texas superstars are plants that have been evaluated by horticulturists of Texas and found to be very superior in thriving in our environment. And that's what we want. We want our plants to thrive. We don't want them to struggle and we say, oh, I just can't deal with this. A long time ago, I planted the great big, the plants that, the Mother's Day plants, the hydrangeas that have the big heads, and I planted a whole row of them. And then we had a severe hot summer, and I could never give them enough water. And then they got fungal disease, and I had to get rid of them all. And I decided, okay, I'm never doing that again. So you have to learn sometimes by bad experience as well as good experience what does grow here, what does well. But for seasonal color, annuals do very well for seasonal color. Perennials are plants that are going to come up. Sometimes they die down in the cold, but they will come back up from the roots. But perennials continue to grow always. And biennials are plants that have vegetative growth the first year, and then they make seed, flower, make seed, and die the second year. This is a plant that I really enjoy. It's a Mexican sunflower, and this thing is just incredible. The bees and butterflies love it, and it grows like crazy. You don't have to water it very much. You don't have to spray it for bugs. You don't have to do anything with it. It just grows like crazy. And it's an annual, but it's very showy, very colorful, and it's very well adapted to Texas. This is another plant that's in my garden that is an excellent, excellent plant. It's a Mystic Spires salvia, and it just grows like crazy. The bees are all over it, and the butterflies are on it, but the bees are just crazy about it. And so it's something, if you like pollinators, now if you're allergic to bee stings, you may not want to plant it, just depends. But I have a neighbor that comes over and says, oh, look at all the bees. Oh, I'm allergic to bees. I can't deal with that. But I like pollinators. I like to make them happy. And they're still blooming now, all the way through early spring to a frost, they'll bloom, and the bees can get nutrients from them. This is a lantana. This lantana wasn't even planted. It came up in decomposed granite, and one that was up above, and every year it comes up and makes the most beautiful shrub. I don't do anything to it. I don't water it. I don't feed it. Nothing. And you can see how beautiful it is. And again, the bees and butterflies really like it. All right, choosing plants for the landscape. We've sort of talked about that, but you have to consider the size of things in your landscape. Trees are usually taller than 15 feet and generally have a single trunk. They are either deciduous or evergreen. Now, deciduous trees are trees that drop their leaves in the fall. So most of your oaks, except for live oaks, do drop their leaves in the fall, as an example. Evergreen would be maybe live oaks, but live oaks do drop their leaves. They just do it mostly in the spring when the new leaves come out. So they have leaves on them all year round. Shrubs usually have multi-stems and are either deciduous or evergreen. So if you pick shrubs for your foundation planting, you don't want a shrub that's bare in the winter if you can avoid it. You would really prefer evergreen shrubs as a foundation planting. But outside of that, you could do either one. Ground covers are usually fast-growing vines or herbaceous plants for slopes or shaded areas. And Asian jasmine and some other plants do very well here. Bulbs or other geophytes that provide seasonal color, like our bulbs that we plant in the fall that bloom in the spring. And then again, your vines can be annual or perennial. I have both. And nice thing about vines is they can cover arbors and walls, and they may provide some screening for you. Turf, of course, it's your grasses that spread and require mowing and attention. Some more, some less. Edible plants, of course, include your fruits and vegetables, and you can intermingle now. Many people who are landscape architects intermingle vegetables with flowers, and it's an excellent idea to do that and very pretty. Also, herbs are nice things to intermingle with your edible plants and your flowers. Cultural considerations in plant selection. Hardiness is one. There are zones. There's USDA zone, and then there's the zone that we use to talk about how hard the freeze is going to be here. And then you need to consider your moisture needs, your bloom times, your mature size, pest or disease problems, deciduous or evergreen, and also that whatever plants you choose mend well with the landscape scheme. And also you have to have these things that are aesthetic. There's certain plants that I think would thrive here, but they just don't appeal to me. They either look too weedy or they're too prickly or whatever. Also, the hydrozone is just considering a water zone where you wouldn't put a hydrangea, for example, even an oak leaf hydrangea, in with succulents and cacti because they have different water needs. And so you don't want to combine things in your landscape that have drastically different needs as far as water goes. Plants at the nursery, mail order plants come bare-rooted, balled and burlapped, or container grown. And most of the plants in the nursery that we see in the big box stores are container grown. But you can order plants from various nurseries in Texas that will come bare-rooted. They'll have instructions with it, but you need to read the instructions from a bare-rooted plant. You need to put it in the ground as soon as possible. And there's certain times of years where you do not want to order a plant, or you can't get a plant like a certain kind of tree until the season is correct for planting it. For example, if you're going to have a tree that you want to plant in your yard and it comes bare rooted, you need to plant it when it's dormant. Same thing with balled and burlap trees in north central Texas. Usually we plant them when they're dormant, which would be the winter time. Bare root plants, again, set in dormant period, and you have the roots in a medium if they're balled and burlapped, and they're usually covered with burlap. And there's some question, well, do I take the burlap off? Because the burlap will disintegrate when you plant it. But you don't want to have any wires or really twine around that. You need to take all that off and spread the roots out and everything. But if you leave some burlap in, it's probably not a problem. Container grown plants are already in a potting mix and they're ready to plant. Plant selection. Trees and shrubs are more likely to be mail ordered by bare root or balled and burlap. Herbaceous plants are found at the local box store or nursery. Seed companies, that's another thing. Starting plants from seed is really gratifying because you have so much more diversity. When you go to the local nurseries, they want to provide plants that people will buy that are showy, have beautiful flowers, especially annuals. And so they will have somewhat limited variety of plants. So if you start plants from seed, though, you can order seed from reputable companies. I like Johnny's Seed in Vermont, and they have vegetables, flowers, anything you can think of. But you have plants that you start yourself that are going to be, that you won't find anyplace else around in the stores. When purchasing plants at the nursery or box store, check for healthy plants. Now, if I have a plant, they say, oh, if it's too pot bound, don't take it home. You know, if it's growing out the bottom of the pot, that's not good. If there's a plant I want, I have found that if I take it out of the pot, and of course it's circled by roots, and it looks like it's, you know, it's going to strangle itself, you can cut those roots and you can rake out the roots and separate them out and still plant them and still have a good plant. But you want to check no yellow brown leaves. You want to be sure you don't get insects or diseases home with you, because you don't want to take these homes and put them in your yard. Requirements of landscape include watering, fertilizing, weeding, mulching, and pruning. That's it. No, just kidding. It's a lot. It's a huge responsibility. You know, welcome to home ownership. If you have a home or you have a garden, you've got to do the things that take care of your plants. You can't just stick them out there and leave them. Selecting methods of watering include in-ground sprinklers, which I do have, which are nice, but you still have to maintain them. Soaker hoses are great. You can wind those through a bed and hook it to the faucet and just let it slowly drip, which is good because you're not doing the leaves, you're getting it at the roots. Drip irrigation is what I have in my raised beds, and it's wonderful. You have the control separate from the rest of your system so that you can control it yourself. And then hose with water breaker, and I do a lot of hand watering of things, especially newly planted things, because the system may not do a good enough job. The other thing too is if it's really hot and we're under water restrictions and there's things that you think are going to need more water, be sure your faucet will allow your hose to go out to all those beds and you water yourself. And it's such a pleasure in the evening time or in the early morning to go out and just water and just enjoy the birds and all the things out in nature. And, you know, and the honking and the cars. No, I'm just kidding. But just the same, it's a pleasure to water sometimes yourself. And then sprinkler attachments. I have several small ones of those, and I may put those in spots where the system's not quite getting it really well and things are looking like they're drying up. Again, consider conservation of water. That's why I hand water, because I don't want to turn the whole system on to water when just a few areas need some extra water. So that's why I go and hand water myself, so the whole system doesn't have to be turned on and I can obey my water restrictions. Fertilizing in the landscape can get very complicated, especially grasses. Shrubs and trees should tolerate alkaline soil and water to avoid iron chlorosis. What is iron chlorosis? Well, if you look at a tree that's non-adapted to north central Texas, our soil is alkaline, and alkaline is the opposite of acid. So pH is what they use as to measure that. The bigger the number from pH beyond 7, the more alkaline it is. Below 7, the smaller the number, the more acid the soil is. And trees and shrubs have learned to adapt to certain types of pH in the soil. And the ones who are adapted will do well here. But if they're not adapted, there's something that would grow in East Texas, which has more acid soil, then trees and plants here, well, the leaves will turn yellow and look pale, and that's because they cannot get don't have the ability to get the iron out of the soil because of the alkaline pH. And so you get a tree that looks rather pitiful, and the leaves look kind of yellowy and pale. The only way to know what fertilizer is needed for your landscape is to send soil samples to the lab at Texas A&M. And if you call the extension office here in Tarrant County, they can send you the bags and the information to collect soil samples, as many as you need, and it's the only way that you actually know for sure. You will receive information about any low or missing nutrients and how much to apply. That is invaluable, because you're just guessing if you don't know how much fertilizer you need to put on your lawn or with your plants and shrubs or your garden. So it's really worth doing. It's not expensive, and it's something that's very valuable, and you can keep that. And then ever so often, if you're having a problem someplace, you can redo it. You can recheck some of things and send it back again and see if you're missing something that you need to have put in. Turf fertilization is usually done on a schedule depending on the type of grass you have. So here we have a list of, it's not totally comprehensive, but it is most of the things that we have in north central Texas. Common Bermuda is fertilized every 8 to 9 weeks starting in late March or early April. And St. Augustine, which is about 4 times a year. St. Augustine is early April, June, and September. And we don't fertilize in the hot of the summer generally, other than early June, because of the possibility of fungal disease. This is why we do not do that in St. Augustine. Buffalo grass is mid-May and mid-September, so it's just twice a year, which is good. and a little easier than some of the others. Zoysia grows well here in Texas. It's early April, mid-June, and early September. So it's similar to St. Augustine. Your all nitrogen fertilizers are recommended for north central Texas. The first number is nitrogen, the second number is phosphorus, and the next number is potassium. And so you can see that our soils have plenty of phosphorus, plenty of potassium, but we do often need nitrogen. So all nitrogen fertilizer is what's highly recommended. Now you'll see other fertilizers in the box stores and things that have the second and third numbers. The 00 represents the phosphorus and the potassium. But just the same, it's good to use primarily all nitrogen. Newly planted trees generally need some root stimulator monthly until they leaf out, and then you can fertilize them. Bare root plants, keep them moist. Do not fertilize until they leaf out. Container grown trees and shrubs may use the same fertilizer as the lawn, and that's what I do. I fertilize the trees and shrubs with the same fertilizer. Transplant of herbaceous plants do well with long-acting fertilizers like Osmocote, and I don't get a kickback for Osmocote, but I do like it. I do use it frequently because it gives you a little more expand, especially with annuals. When you plant annuals, you're not expecting them to go more than one season because they're going to grow, they're going to flower, they're going to set seed, and they're going to die in one season. So something like Osmocote will carry them through the whole season. Weeds in the landscape. Oh my God, weeds are plants that are not desired, although some of them can be rather pretty, and must be removed by hand or other methods. Now, I do not do anything about dandelions. I actually think they're rather pretty. And the bees, sometimes for the bees in early spring, that's the only things that are blooming. And you see the bees on the dandelion. So I don't do those, but other people, dandelions have to go. Mulching deters weeds, of course, that's supposed to be weed, the D there, not weeds. But herbicides may be used to spot treat weeds. A herbicide, like Roundup, for example, and there's others on the market. You can spot treat, you can spray a weed. But remember that a herbicide that's a general herbicide will also kill your grass. If you use too much herbicide on your lawn, you'll kill parts of the lawn as well as the weeds. Pre-emergents are useful for grassy weeds and broadleaf weeds. You apply for warm season weeds in March and June and cool season weeds in September. And generally speaking, you need to do all of those applications. Used to be you just did in March and September, and I think they've increased it to June for summer types of weeds that come up. If you've got Johnson grass and you've got Dallas grass and you've got the winter ryegrass that comes up like crazy, this really helps to do the application. I'm not going to give you any information on the types. One thing I want to say is that if you're going to use pre-emergent for weeds, remember there's weed and feed that you see so much on the market. You actually need to use your pre-emergent before you fertilize your lawn. So to do a weed and feed, you're off schedule, and it's convenient to do that, do a weed and feed all at the same time, or do a pre-emergent with fertilizing. But you actually, if you can see in March, you don't fertilize St. Augustine until April. And most of the time you don't fertilize any of your grasses until your lawn turf until April, or first week of April or so. So pre-emergent should go down first early and then fertilize them. Sedges are, nut sedge is a real pain in the grass, in the lawn. It can be very, very invasive. You can kill that with Image Sedgehammer or Ortho Nut Sedge Killer, and there's some more on the market as well since I wrote this up. But I use Image and it works beautifully if you have sedges come up. It may discolor your grass, your turf a little bit, but your turf will come right back. It doesn't really kill the turf. So that's what I use, but it can be a real pain in the landscape. Pruning trees and shrubs. If you have to get up on a ladder to prune, call a professional. Okay, that's if you have to get up on a ladder, you do not want to fall off a ladder. You don't want to fall off a roof. You don't want to have a bad fall, period, no matter what age you are. Call professionals for larger tree limbs. And let me give you just some information. I have a neighborhood that's got lots of big mature trees, and I see butchering mature trees. It makes me ill because sometimes the trees won't survive it. Anybody that comes by your house and volunteers, has a pickup and a chainsaw, is not the person you want. What you want to do is you want a company that's reliable, and you want them to have an arborist, and you want to call the arborist out to see your tree in case maybe you have dead limbs, maybe you're concerned about the health of the tree, you know it may need trimming, but you just want to talk to an arborist. They'll come out, they'll look at your tree, they'll talk with you, you have a plan made about what you want to do, and then their crew will come and they'll do a professional job on your trees. But if you see trees where the limbs have trimmed out on a big tree, where there's just a few leaves on the ends of the limb, that's not enough. That's not enough leaf to provide nutrients for that tree. So that photosynthesis can occur there, but it's not enough to provide food for the big trunk and the limbs. So the tree will slowly decline and it will eventually die. And then it becomes more money to have the whole tree taken down, and then you can have a dangerous tree where limbs are going to fall on people and hurt them or on their cars, and you are responsible for that if it's your tree. So call a professional if you want a large tree trimmed, so that it's done professionally and not just somebody that comes by. Fruit trees require special pruning in general to create a bowl shape, and that's a whole nother class on fruit trees and trimming trees, but you want a bowl shape for a fruit tree, so you cut out the central leader. And the reason you do that is because you want the sunlight and rain and everything to get to all parts of the tree, and so that you can harvest without having to get up on a ladder. Shrubs need some pruning to maintain height and thick growth, remove dead branches, remove diseased branches and suckers. And I have found that trimming them gently is best to do. Never prune anything basically more than a third of its growth, and then know when to prune blooming shrubs so you don't remove future blooms. I've had several calls at the extension office about my hydrangeas just never bloom. What's wrong with my hydrangeas? And I say, well, when did you prune them? Oh, in the winter. I pruned them in February or March. And they said, well, you pruned away all of the potential flowers is what happens. So don't prune them. Prune them in the fall if you have to, but don't prune them back. Let them bloom and then prune them after they bloom. Hedges can be pruned to have the side taper down and not taper up. And I'll show, there's a picture I wanted to show you. When you have a hedge like boxwoods, for example, I see the boxwoods pruned, they have a flat top, of course, and then they go downward so that they have a taper downward toward the base of the shrub. That is totally wrong to do that. You should have a hedge with a flat top if you want to make a hedge that flat, and then it should taper outward so that the bottom part of the shrub gets as much sunlight as the top of the shrub. If you don't do that, then what happens is, as the bottom of the shrub that's pruned inward doesn't get as much light, so the leaves and everything fades away on the bottom. So what you end up with is like a shrub on a stalk where the upper part's there and the bottom part has disappeared. And I'll have a picture of that soon. Installing shrubs and other plants along a foundation is an error that will, if they outgrow the space. And I mentioned that before. You don't want to look out your window and look at the back of a shrub. You want to have a scenery that you can look out. So if it's too tall and you're having to cut it back all the time, then take it out and put something else there. Another landscape area is planting aggressive ground covers or vines that require constant cutting back. And I have a huge bed of Asian jasmine, and yes, it does have to be cut back regularly. So that's my job to do that. And it's not an easy job because it's a large bed, but you have to cut it back. But it does make a nice vine. If you want to have the yard man do that, you can do that if you want to have somebody that can do that for you, but it's a job. Bad mulch like rubber tires, impermeable plastic, ugly stuff, that's really awful. When you see that, you think, wow. Random plantings of plants that should be in a mass planting. If you're going to plant things, like I said, 3s, 5s, 7s, 9s, odd numbers, but cluster things together. Don't have one single shrub in front of a window and nothing else around it matches. Try and put things together in groupings because it just looks so much better. The other thing, too, as I mentioned, styles of homes. If you have a home that's a more modern home, you need another kind of. If you have a house that's more formal, you need to have plants that are more formal. Pruning shrubs or trees in the wrong season, we mentioned that. Lawn problems not addressed in a timely manner. This year has been a bad year for pinch bugs, and I've seen whole lawns disappear, and nobody's gone out there to look at it, but they're going to have to resod it if they want a lawn. It's really expensive to let it go. So check things out and deal with it. Find out from somebody, maybe have somebody come look at it, maybe that that knows about things, and make a decision about what to do. Planting messy trees that drop fruit on the landscape. You don't want a female ginkgo biloba, for example. The fruit stinks, it's really messy, and it's not good. Not improving your soil quality prior to planting. That's very important. If you're planting into hard clay, your plants are not going to thrive. They will struggle if you don't amend your soil. So if you don't amend your soil to do a garden, vegetable garden, flower garden, perennial garden, whatever, you need to find out what you need to do to improve your soil. Again, the Extension Office can help you with those things as well. Just want to go through something quickly. I found some interesting things online. This is from the New York Times. Yardson is an online service that will design your space and recommend plant material. And you complete a questionnaire. They do a satellite imagery that confirms the space boundaries and determines the sun and shade patterns. And it's the least expensive package is $249, but other prices can start at $1,000 or more for involved projects. But it is an online service, which is kind of neat. Also, one's called Land Stylist. Is a service by a landscape designer for the purpose of providing sustainable and stylish design for people on a budget. And then you can look at a board of inspiration, a garden plan with a layout, and plant suggestions, and an individual consultation, and that starts at $300. Hardscape is the most labor-intensive for the homeowner. If you don't want to spend much money, it will do your renderings. It's an iPhone app that was created by a landscaper turned tech entrepreneur. It allows you to be a virtual landscape designer by snapping your outdoor space and filling in and everything. This is arduous, needless to say, and it's mostly on your back to do it. So it's cheapest. All right, we're going to have some pictures here and talk a little bit about the pictures. This is not far from where I live, and it's a ranch-style house. It's the landscape that they put, the plantings in front of the house are actually pretty good. The Soto with the bloom on it is a little out from the window, so it's not obstructing too badly. It's a little close to the walk, though, and the tips are kind of sharp. But it's got an agave, it's got a yucca. You can see the yucca bloom. It's got Mexican feathergrass. It's got that Soto I mentioned. And so it's almost like a xeriscape in the front there. But what makes it not a xeriscape? It's the lawn. It's a St. Augustine lawn in front of a xeriscape, which is like you scratch your head and you say, well, why didn't they just put buffalo grass or something in there if they're trying to do a xeriscape? So you're still going to have to water that lawn. So it's not really a water conservation xeriscape. It is partial xeriscape. This is the house, this is an example of a formal house style. As you can see, on the other side, there's another shrub there. But you can see they trimmed the top flat and then they trimmed it down into like a slope on either side. So what's happening is where the light doesn't get underneath the shrub, the leaves start deteriorating and they drop off, and eventually you're just going to get open space underneath that shrub. So if you're trying to do privacy, it's not very helpful, and if you're trying to make it attractive, it's not very helpful to trim a shrub like that. That's just an example of that. Formal houses generally have a lot of symmetry, and they also have more, I call stately plants, like the two great big Melior Stevens in the front there. They do have a little asymmetry with the trees. There's a Japanese maple, and then there's a crepe myrtle. Right, this is just a modest little house on the west side of Fort Worth, and I was driving by. I said, that is just pretty. This is an example of a cottage garden in the front, and I couldn't see the back, but it was just really attractive. This is August, and you can see a lot of things are blooming, but the things that stand out are the rudbeckia there. It just jumps at you. They're so pretty. And it shows that even if you live in a modest home, you can still have a lovely garden that has low maintenance. And actually, they have a hose out there, but it actually tolerates pretty low water conditions. And it's full sun, so they have the advantage. I think there's some Russian sage back there, and I'm trying to think what else is there. It's a little hard for me to see. This is a house not too far from me. What do you don't see there? You don't see anything. It's just bare bones. It's got a few shrubs at the corner here, and then it just goes straight across. So there's no curvilinear beds, there's no color, there's no visual interest. The lawn is just so-so. And what you have, maybe they're just so busy and they don't have time, or they're just not lawn or yard people, but it looks so much better. And you just want to go knock on the door and say, can I make your yard better? You just want to do something for it. And they're not going to have butterflies, they're not going to have bees, they're not going to have lizards, they're not going to have snakes. Maybe they don't like snakes. They're not going to have birds, they're not going to have any wildlife, because there's nothing there that wildlife would enjoy, and certainly nothing for the pollinators, which is important to me. Hewlin is a very busy boulevard that runs north-south. There's not that many north-south streets in Fort Worth. This is one of them. And believe it or not, the city did not do this structure. A private homeowner did this structure, had it done. His house is just beyond that wall. He chose all the plantings that go in there, and he could have chosen better as if he had consulted with a landscape architect. All the plants he put in there are adapted to full sun and to heat. And then this Mexican feathergrass, he put all of this in himself. He was out working one day, and I stopped and asked him, do you have a professional do this? He said, no, I had professionals do the wall because I can't do that kind of work, but I chose all the plant material. I said, you need to be a master gardener. I invited him, but I don't think he's ever shown up. Maybe he has, I just don't know. This is another little cottage garden not too far from where I live. And most of the yard, there's a little grass there, but most of it looks like this. And it's got lilies, and it's got rutabaga, and it's got all kinds of plants in there, little crepe myrtles in there. It's just attractive. And of course, it's very roughly done. As you can see, there's no mortaring of the stones. It's just kind of stacked in there to make the bed. But it's attractive. This is another house that used to have a circle. The yard would be in circle. Someone else bought the home, and they decided to make from the curb, they made a walkway out of stone. And every plant in there is native or adapted plants. And I thought, I couldn't knock on the door and talk with them like I did the gentleman, but I thought they did a really good job of doing this yard. This is a more formal yard. It's more shady for one thing. And it's just a simple house. The house is just a straight across house with the porch makes it a little bit more interesting. But it's more formal, as you can see. It's got the stone lions in the front. This is an example of more formal. It's not a cottage garden per se. It's a more formal landscape. So they have the boxwoods, and then they've got the plantings inside the corners of the boxwoods. It makes it more interesting. This, I think, very attractive. This is an example of something that's called inframement, and that means that you do something to draw the eye to something. So what do you see? The first thing you look at this house, when you look at the house, you see symmetry is first thing you see, but it's not really a formal house, although I said formal houses generally have symmetry. But your eye goes right to the front door. The walk goes to the front door, but the pots on the side, the plantings on the side, and the trees on the side also draw your eye to the front door. And that's just something is called inframement as far as landscapes go. All right, this was last year, and this year I walked by it, and it's really matured. But the house it's on a hill, and it used to be just a grassy slope down to the curb. So what they did was they staggered the height of each area of the grass, and they put as you see in the corner up there to your left, there's like a rusty looking barrier. That's called cortan, and it is a special metal that you can buy by the yard to make beds with. It's expensive. It's a steel that the outside of the steel will get a rusty patina, but it doesn't rust inside. And so it's very valuable to make a colorful look to your yard if you want to buy that and to line your beds with it. But like I say, it's pricey. But this, what they did was then they took all the grass out, and you can see there's a driveway. There's a piece of a car up there, and there's a circle drive, and then they put in all xeriscape, and it does look good. And they have virtually no grass at all in this yard now. The grass was sort of deteriorating on the slope. There was some erosion. So this looks much better. And now the Mexican feathergrass has just really come into its own. It's just really beautiful. This is a master gardener that did this. She moved in, I think probably several years ago, and this was also a grassy slope that went down to the curb. So she put a driveway and then put the stone wall, and then there's still some slope there, but all the plants that she put in there are native or adapted and low water requirements. And it's matured now. This year it's just gorgeous. If you ever go down Overton Park West, her house is close to South Drive down there if you go that way, but it's really pretty. So she did a wonderful job. I don't know her name, and I'd like to meet her. This is an example of another house with sort of a xeriscape lawn. It doesn't matter when. There's a modern house behind that. There's a circle drive behind that, and then everything in there is native or adapted, so it looks really good. This is an example of something that is a layering. And, most people, if they put a shrub in the front, they put like a row of shrubs. That's it, just a row of shrubs. These people do have it's straight across. It's not really curvilinear per se, but it's layered. So they have what looks like gara in the front. They have rose bushes, and then they have a shrub in the back. I'm not sure what that shrub is, and they have a small tree on the side there. But they do trim it. It does kind of cover the windows, but they do trim it back in the winter and trim the rose bushes back and the shrubs back. But I just think it's an example of layering that you can do for interest if you move into a home and you can't expand the beds out and you have to deal with what you have and it's straight across the front, then layering is another way of providing interest when you pass your home, people look and say, that's really pretty. It's not just a straight line of shrubs. This is a house, newly built house. Is very expensive neighborhood. But I like the way that they're on a corner, and the house is on the corners, but it doesn't face the corner per se. But to soften the corner, they use Vitex. And so you've got 3 Vitex trees there that they're just about done blooming, but they're very pretty when they first start blooming. And then underneath they have vines. Again, Vitex is a plant that's very adapted to Texas. I don't know if Vitex is a native plant or not, but it's a very, very beautiful plant that does bloom, purple blooms in the spring and summer. This is another yard that has, as you can see, it's Texas sage is just huge there. A lot of native and adaptive plants that require low water. This is Master Gardener yard, and he designed a side yard there with flowers, and then this past a couple years ago, he put in an extra yard, and there's always something blooming there. I've never failed to go by if there's not something blooming. This is another picture of it. It's just beautiful, I think. This is August. So, in August, everything's looking really tired. His yard does not look tired at all. This is my backyard. Before I retired, I wanted to build. I knew that I would be growing considerably older, and I didn't want to have to get down on my hands and knees and then try and get back up again. I can get down, but getting up is a real problem sometimes. And so what I did was I hired a company to take most of the backyard, remove the grass, and put in raised beds. Those are stacked stones. There's a slight slope, so you can see the stones go lower and then higher to accommodate the slope so that it's still even at the top. The height is still even. And but they're not mortared. So the lizards love the inside of that. Lizards and sometimes snakes, usually small ones, but they love it. The lizards are always sunning themselves in the sun, and in the wintertime they come out from inside of their lizards everywhere. And I just love them because they eat the bad bugs. You want lizards and things like that in your yard. And so I can garden in the beds. I designed it myself, but it's 4x8. 4x4 in the center, and it's invaginated. As you can see, she can get into the center of it, and they're all the long beds are 4x8s, and it's got drip irrigation in there, and the irrigation controls are at the side, and then I've got my greenhouse right behind there. So it's nice. It's like I say, that's an expensive thing to do, but if you save for it, you might be able to do something like that. But if you can make raised beds, you can make them out of concrete blocks, you can make them out of bricks, you can make them out of wood, you can make them out of stone, you can make them out of anything and deal with them well, and they will do well for you in North Central Texas. You don't have to deal with our soil here. And you can be the one responsible for your plants and what goes in your soil, in your beds. And that's just another view of it. Those are not weeds, those are 4-nerve daisies that have seeded themselves into the decomposed granite. And so I let them bloom and reseed, and then I pull them out and when it gets cold. And that's just another view of the garden from one end of it. But anyway, it's fun to do landscaping. You can do it many things yourself. You can hire things done, but it's so much fun to get out and do things yourself. And as I usually tell people, my garden is always a trial garden because I like to try all kinds of plants and see what does well here and what doesn't do well sometimes. But the Extension Office has a wonderful list of trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals that are native and adapted to North Central Texas, and you call the Tarrant County Extension Office, and they will send you, or email you is even better, a list of things that work well in Texas and work well in North Central Texas. Thank you.